6 Minute English.
From BBC Learning English.
Hello, this is 6 Minute English from BBC Learning English. I'm Neil.
And I'm Beth. Switch on the TV or read a newspaper and it's full of bad news about the environment. But climate change is damaging more than just the planet's health. It's affecting human health too.
A growing number of people around the world are experiencing something psychiatrists are calling eco-anxiety. Eco-anxiety involves feeling grief, guilt, fear or hopelessness about the future of the planet due to climate change.
Of course, direct victims of climate change suffer most. Flood survivors experience depression and anxiety, and people breathing polluted air are at a higher risk of dementia. But according to the Institute of Psychiatrists, just reading about the state of the planet in the news is causing stress and anxiety.
In this programme on eco-anxiety, we'll be learning some useful vocabulary related to this worrying topic and hopefully be hearing some happier environmental news as well.
I hope so, Neil. With so much bad news, it's sometimes hard to feel optimistic about the future.
Well, here's a question about some good climate news for a change. In Australia, an animal thought to be extinct has been spotted for the first time in over 50 years. But what is the animal? Is it A, a shark, B, a lizard, or C, a parrot?
I'll guess it's a shark.
OK, Beth, I'll reveal the answer later. Unsurprisingly, many of those suffering from eco-anxiety are young people. When BBC Radio 4 programme Woman's Hour spoke with veteran environmentalist Judy Ling Wong, they asked her if she was worried for young people today.
I have tremendous compassion for them because what a mess we have left the world in, our generation and the generation before. But of course, the science is so advanced now. Very much in the past, the science would say, yes, we think we perhaps have this model. So now we have the exact science. So it is an absolutely different ballgame. We actually know what to do now. It is about getting on with it. And the young people are the furthest ahead in this. They can see the future as theirs, and they're impassioned to do something about it.
Judy feels compassion, a strong feeling of sympathy for young people and the wish for them not to suffer. She blames older generations and uses the phrase "what a mess" to emphasize that the planet is in bad shape. You can use the phrase "what a something" to intensify the thing you're talking about. For example, if someone gives you a birthday present, you might say, "What a nice surprise."
But Judy is optimistic. The science on climate change is much more accurate than it used to be. For example, we know that moving away from fossil fuels would be a big help. Science has changed the ballgame, the set of circumstances that controls how a situation occurs.
Knowing exactly how to stop climate change has impassioned young people. They feel strongly motivated to take action. And as it turns out, taking action may be one of the most powerful antidotes to eco-anxiety. Actually doing something to combat climate change reduces feelings of helplessness. Here's Judy Ling Wong again speaking with BBC Radio 4's Women's Hour.
When the Institute of Psychiatry published a special issue on climate anxiety, one of the papers pointed out is that if you can do something about it, if you feel part of the movement to change things or to stabilize things, then you feel much better. And also, at the moment, the government is trying to reach net zero by 2050 and all that. And they're committed to creating 2 million new green jobs. Now, if young people and activists think about this, if you have a green job, you're actually dedicating your entire working life to building a green, sustainable future. And that has a huge effect on your psychology.
Judy urges young people to join a movement, a group of people who share the same beliefs and ideas. Being part of the solution, not the problem, helps reduce anxiety. And with new green jobs, young people can protect the environment their entire working life. The period of life spent in employment between leaving school and retirement.
And Judy's hopefulness is shared. Recent polls showed that the majority of people are worried about climate change and are prepared to make changes. Finally, some good news. And speaking of good news, what was the answer to your question, Neil?
I asked which extinct animal has recently been spotted in Australia. You guessed it was a shark, which was the wrong answer. Actually, it was a lizard, the earless grassland dragon, a native to East Australia that was last seen in the wild in 1969. OK, let's recap the vocabulary we've learned from this program on eco-anxiety, starting with compassion, a strong feeling of sympathy and the wish for people not to suffer.
The phrase what a something is used to intensify the thing you're talking about. For example, what a mess, or what a nice surprise.
The ball game refers to the set of circumstances that controls how a situation happens.
If you're impassioned, you're emotionally motivated to do something.
A movement is a group of people with the same beliefs, ideas, and aims.
And finally, your working life is the period of life spent in employment between leaving school and retirement. Once again, our 6 minutes are up. Join us again next time here on 6 Minute English. Goodbye for now.
Bye.
6 Minute English.
From BBC Learning English.
Hello, this is 6 Minute English from BBC Learning English. I'm Neil.
And I'm Beth.
Many of those leading the fight against climate change are young people who feel betrayed by politicians and adults. In survey after survey, children report feeling that they have no future, that humanity is doomed, and that governments are failing to act.
This is causing many young people to feel worried about the state of the planet. There's even a name for it, climate anxiety. And it's also creating conflict between adults and children in families and schools.
What's certain is that a solution to the climate emergency needs the cooperation of everyone, both old and young. So, can talking honestly about the climate help mend the divisions between generations? That's what we'll be discussing in this programme, along with some useful new vocabulary.
But first, I have a question for you, Neil. Many young people's hopes and fears about climate change are symbolised by the Swedish activist Greta Thunberg. These days, Greta travels the world speaking about the climate emergency, but her protests started much smaller in her hometown, Stockholm. So how did Greta Thunberg's climate activism begin? Did she A. plant trees in her school garden, B. skip school on Fridays, or C. recycle her school's plastic waste?
I think Greta Thunberg went on strike and skipped school on Fridays.
OK, Neil, I will reveal the correct answer later in the programme. One recent survey showed that 3/4 or more of young people in the UK feel the future is frightening. Here, Imi, aged 14, and Millie, 11, share some of their fears with BBC Ideas.
If climate change were like an animal or a plant, I think it'd be some sort of parasite, because it's the only thing that's actually growing and getting bigger while everything else starts dying off. I think climate change is like really scary, and the fact that lots of people aren't doing much about it just sort of freaks me out.
The environment is definitely very special because if we get rid of it, there's nowhere else we can go. Like, it's a very 1 in a million sort of planet.
Imi calls climate change a parasite. In the natural world, a parasite is an animal or plant that lives on another living thing and feeds from it. If you describe a person as a parasite, you mean they are lazy and live off other people supporting them or giving them money.
Likewise, Imi thinks climate change is sucking the goodness out of the planet, and she uses a slang idiom to describe her feelings. It freaks me out. If something freaks you out, it makes you become very emotional, upset, or confused.
Millie agrees. What freaks her out is that governments don't seem to be doing much about the problem. It's not as if we can escape anywhere. Humankind only has one home, planet Earth. Millie calls Earth 1 in a million, meaning very special or rare. So what can be done? Psychotherapist Caroline Hickman has visited 10 countries around the world, talking to over 100,000 teenagers about their climate fears. They told her about parents ignoring them when they wanted to discuss their feelings, and adults telling them, fixing the planet is your job now. Here she gives BBC Ideas some advice on discussing climate change with children.
My advice to adults
parents, teachers, is do not put it off. Don't push it away. Don't save it up and just have that big conversation. Talk about it regularly. That's crucial. And it's okay for you to say to your children, I don't have all the answers. We're not sure exactly how to deal with all of this, but let's find out together.
Caroline's top tip is to discuss the climate crisis regularly, to talk with children about their climate fears and not put it off, not delay talking about it until later.
Caroline also advises parents not to push it away, to choose to forget about or ignore the subject. A better response is to tell kids honestly, we don't have all the answers, but by sharing ideas, we can work things out together. A more hopeful message, and one that's shared by climate champion Greta Thunberg.
Yes, and it's time to reveal the answer to my question. How did Greta Thunberg's climate activism begin, Neil?
I said it was by skipping school on Fridays.
Which was the correct answer. Greta started her school strike for climate in August 2018, before it was taken up by over 1.6 million school children from 125 countries around the world. OK, let's recap the vocabulary we've learnt from this programme, starting with climate anxiety, feeling worried, afraid or depressed because of climate change.
A parasite is an animal or plant that feeds off another living thing.
If something makes you feel very emotional or upset, you might say, it freaks me out.
The idiom 1 in a million describes something which is extremely special, rare or unlikely.
And finally, 2 phrasal verbs to finish with. To put something off, which means to delay doing it till later, and to push something away, which means to decide to forget about or ignore it. Once again, our 6 minutes are up. But remember to join us again soon for more trending topics and useful vocabulary here at 6 Minutes English. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye.
6 Minute English.
From BBC Learning English.
Hello, this is 6 Minute English from BBC Learning English. I'm Neil.
And I'm Sam.
We're talking about the environment in this programme, specifically climate change. Now, Sam, what do you think is the biggest cause of climate change?
An obvious answer would be that climate change is the result of carbon emissions caused by humans. It's about people's carbon footprint, the measurement of how much carbon dioxide is produced by someone's everyday activities.
That makes sense. But recently, some scientists, especially in the West, have been focusing on another issue. The increasing number of people in the world, something known as overpopulation. In this programme, we'll be discussing the controversial link between overpopulation and climate change. And as usual, we'll be learning some new vocabulary as well.
Sounds good, Neil. But first, I have a question for you. Over the last 100 years, within one lifetime, the world's population has soared. At the start of the 20th century, it was around 1.5 billion. But how many people are there in the world today? Is it A, 7 billion, B, 8 billion, or C, 9 billion?
I'll say around 8 billion people live on the planet today.
OK, Neil, I'll reveal the answer later in the programme. Since climate change is caused by human activities, it seems common sense that fewer people would mean lower carbon emissions. But in fact, the connection isn't so simple. Not everyone emits carbon equally, and people in the Western world produce far more than people in sub-Saharan Africa or Asia.
Arvind Ravikumar is Professor of Climate Policy at the University of Texas. He's made the surprising calculation that an extra 2 billion people born in low-consuming countries would actually add very little to global carbon emissions. Here, Kate Lamble and Neil Rosell, presenters of BBC World Service programme The Climate Question, discuss Professor Ravikumar's findings.
What he's saying is kind of astonishing, right? 2 billion people is, to say the least, a lot. It's the combined population of Europe and Africa.
He's crunched the numbers and found that an extra 2 billion low-income people, as defined by the World Bank, these are people without cars, without electricity often, would see global emissions rise by just 1.5%.
Add 2 billion high-income earners, that's people with cars and power and all the mod cons, and Arvind reckons emissions would rise by more than 60%.
So when it comes to climate change and population, where you were born matters.
Professor Ravi Kumar made his discovery after crunching the numbers, an idiom meaning performing many mathematical calculations involving large amounts of data.
He concluded that whereas 2 billion low-income people would increase carbon levels very little, 2 billion high-income people would increase it a lot. That's because high-income populations have mod cons, which is short for modern conveniences, technology and machines like cars, fridges and air conditioning that make life easier and more pleasant.
According to this view, the real problem is not overpopulation, but overconsumption. Affluence, that's having lots of money and owning many things, has become a big factor in climate change. And that's true in poorer countries as well as richer ones.
Listen to Rajesh Joshi, reporter for BBC World Service's The Climate Question, interviewing a rich Indian housewife, Priti Dagan, in her luxurious home in New Delhi.
I need everything that I buy. You cannot be judgmental about anybody's needs. And I derive a lot of happiness out of being very, very drawn towards consumer things. And I love it. And I am not apologetic about it.
So if I tell you that poor people have a smaller carbon footprint as compared to their richer counterparts, do you feel apologetic about it?
So the brain says, yes, we should be apologetic about it, but the heart does not agree. Yes, poor can't afford lots of stuff, so their carbon imprint is small. But here, my heart wins over my brain because it gives me happiness.
Priti does not feel apologetic about her shopping. She doesn't think that she should feel sorry. Shopping makes her happy and she lets her heart rule her head, an idiom meaning that you do something based on emotions rather than reason.
Priti is being very honest. She is consuming and looking for happiness in a way that people in the West have been doing for decades.
It seems overconsumption is a bigger cause of climate change than raw population numbers. Speaking of which, what was the answer to your question, Sam?
Yes. I asked about the current global population. You guessed it was around 8 billion people, which was the correct answer. According to the United Nations, the world's population reached 8 billion on November 15th, 2022. Right, let's recap the vocabulary we've learned, starting with carbon footprint, a measurement of how much carbon dioxide someone's activities produce.
If you crunch numbers, you perform many mathematical calculations involving large amounts of data.
Mod cons is short for modern conveniences, machines like cars, washing machines, and fridges, which make life easier and more pleasant.
Affluence means having lots of money or material possessions.
If you are apologetic, you show that you feel sorry for something harmful you have said or done.
And finally, the idiom, let your heart rule your head, means to do something based on emotion and personal desires rather than for logical or practical reasons. For now, it's goodbye.
Bye-bye.
6 Minute English.
From BBC Learning English.
Hello, this is 6 Minute English from BBC Learning English. I'm Neil.
And I'm Beth.
Do you have a bank account, Beth? Or, like my grandparents, do you keep your money under the mattress?
Sure, I have a bank account with one of the big high street banks.
Yes, me too. But do you know exactly what your money's being used for? Is it helping fight climate change or polluting the planet? Our money doesn't just sit there in the bank. It's invested to fund other businesses, some of which are far from environmentally friendly. So, do you know if your money is funding dirty practices like oil drilling?
No, I don't. I have to admit I'm very green about money. And I don't mean green as in environmentally friendly. I mean green as in ignorant or naive. In this programme, we'll be discussing ways in which our money can help protect the environment. And as usual, we'll be learning some useful new vocabulary as well.
Great. But first I have a question for you, Beth. As the climate crisis worsens, people are making changes in their lives to help. For example, by driving less or cycling more. One of the most effective things to do is be smart about investing your money. So, according to the campaign Make My Money Matter, which of the following is the best way to fight climate change? Is it A, to stop eating meat, B, to stop flying, or C, to change your pension?
I'll guess it's changing your pension.
OK, Beth, I'll reveal the answer later in the programme. concerns about how banks invest our money led to the UK's first environmentally sustainable bank, Triodos, which opened in Bristol in 2012. John Fleetwood, who's worked in sustainable investing for decades, thinks public interest in ethical banks has ballooned in the last few years, as he told BBC Radio 4 programme Costing the Earth.
You know, it was always viewed, I think, as a niche thing, something for those that had very clear views on the world, social views. That's now broadened hugely. There's great concern about greenwashing.
I bet.
So who's jumping on the bandwagon? That's a huge concern amongst investors. So what I'm doing is to tackle that and actually to say, okay, which are the funds that are actually making a positive social and environmental impact?
Ethical banks used to be considered niche, interesting or appealing only to a small number of people. But as environmentally responsible investing increased, banks started jumping on the bandwagon, an idiom meaning to become involved in an activity because it's popular and not because you're really interested in it.
As a result, some banks have been accused of greenwashing, attempting to appear environmentally friendly without actually doing anything serious to protect the environment.
But remember, banks rely on customers' money and are likely to change their behaviour when customers threaten to take their money elsewhere. This idea inspired British film director Richard Curtis to start his campaign Make My Money Matter. On TV, Richard has raised millions of pounds for the BBC's charity Comic Relief, but even he was surprised by the amount of money saved by doing one simple thing: moving your pension to an environmentally sustainable fund. And as Richard told BBC Radio 4 programme Costing the Earth, he was even encouraged by former Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney.
You know, when I started this, everyone said, well, you know, all the mechanisms and all the accounting and all the transparency isn't quite there yet. But Mark Carney said to me, go for it, because it will be. The more that people become interested, the more transparent companies will have to be, the more examples they'll give you of good things that you're investing in, so that, as it were, it will get better the more the spotlight is put on exactly what an ethical or sustainable pension is doing.
The more people demand responsible pensions, the more banks need to be transparent, meaning open and honest about their investments.
This in turn puts the spotlight on how pension funds are being used. For example, whether they support large oil corporations or renewable energy companies. To put the spotlight on something means to attract attention to it, usually to share information about something bad. Luckily, the customer is always right, and by managing our money ethically, we can all help a little.
I think it's time to reveal the answer to your question about the most effective way to fight climate change, Neil. I said it was by moving your pension into ethical investments.
Which was the correct answer. In fact, changing your pension is thought to be 21 times more effective than avoiding meat and stopping flying put together. OK, let's recap the vocabulary we've learned from this programme, starting with green, an adjective with several meanings, one of which is naive or inexperienced.
A niche interest appeals only to a small number of people.
Greenwashing describes attempts by a business to seem more environmentally friendly than they really are.
The idiom jump on the bandwagon means become involved in an activity because it's popular and likely to succeed, not because you're really interested in it.
When a business is transparent, it's easy to see how it works because it's open and honest without hidden secrets.
And finally, the phrase to put the spotlight on something means to draw attention to it. Once again, our 6 minutes are up. Join us again soon for more useful vocabulary here at 6 Minute English. Bye for now.
Goodbye.
6 Minute English.
From BBC Learning English.
Hello, this is 6 Minute English from BBC Learning English. I'm Neil.
And I'm Beth.
We all know how horrible it feels to be thirsty. Human bodies need around 3 litres of water a day, and thankfully, most of us can just turn on the kitchen tap to get clean drinking water.
But globally, over 2 billion people, around a quarter of the world's population, live in water-stressed countries, where access to water for drinking, cooking and washing is not guaranteed. What's more, water is also needed to grow food, and that's getting harder due to droughts, which are increasing with climate change.
In this programme, we'll visit farmers in one of the driest places on Earth, Yuma in the USA, where a new technology involving liquid clay is helping farmers grow fruit and vegetables in the desert. And as usual, we'll be learning some useful new vocabulary too.
But first, I have a question for you, Neil. Everyone knows that plants need sunlight and water to grow, but soil is just as important. One of the most useful soils is clay, a dense, smooth soil which is very fertile but sticky. Clay has been used in agriculture for thousands of years, but what is its more modern use? Is clay good for A. Curing headaches, B. Digesting food, or C. Smoothing face skin?
Well, I think clay can be used to smooth the skin on people's faces.
OK, Neil, we'll find out if that's the correct answer later. Lack of water and farming are closely connected. Agriculture uses a massive 70% of the world's fresh water supply, so ways to use water more efficiently are much needed. Ole Sivertsen's company, Desert Control, works with date farmers in Yuma, an area on the border of California and Mexico. One of the hottest places on Earth, Yuma has been experiencing its worst drought in 500 years, forcing farmers to pump water from rivers to grow their date palm trees.
Fortunately, Ole's team have created a liquid that, they say, can turn the sandy desert soil into a sponge, which holds water and nutrients. Here he explains his invention to Anthony Wallace, reporter for BBC World Service programme People Fixing the World.
To understand how it works, we need to look at the difference between sandy soil and clay soil. Sandy desert soil has a lot of gaps in it, so water drains through it quickly, making it hard for plants to establish a root system in the ground. But clay soil is made up of much smaller particles that cling together and naturally stop water from escaping.
It creates the habitat for the soil microbiology to also start to develop and evolve. So it's kind of a kickstart as well to nature's natural processes.
The problem with sandy soil is that it drains water. If you drain something, you remove the liquid from it. Clay soil, on the other hand, is made of smaller particles which cling or stick together tightly and hold water, helping plants grow.
Ole makes a liquid by mixing clay and water, which changes the soil composition and kickstarts the growth of his trees. The liquid makes the trees start growing more quickly. Liquid clay technology is still new, and costing around $2,000 an acre, it's not cheap. But Ole claims his technique halves the amount of water needed to grow fruit trees, and that most farmers will make back their investment within 2 years.
Ole's claims sound too good to be true, but are there downsides to interfering with nature in this way? Presenters Myra Anubi and Anthony Wallace discussed this question for BBC World Service's People Fixing the World.
Anthony, I'm still left wondering, right, when you manipulate soil like this, could you be causing problems down the line?
Yeah, I think any time that there's a new technology where you are, like you said, manipulating nature, only time will tell what the long-term effects of that will be. But Ole did stress that their liquid clay does not use any chemicals, only clay, air, and water.
Ole's liquid clay involves manipulating soil, using and controlling it skillfully to achieve some result. Myra worries that when people do this, they could create problems down the line, at some unspecified point in the future.
In fact, only time will tell if liquid clay is a long-term solution to the problem of water scarcity. The phrase "only time will tell" means that the result of something happening now will not be known until the future. Something we can know, though, is the answer to my question, Neil.
Yes, you asked about a modern use for clay, and I guessed it was for smoothing facial skin.
Which was the correct answer. A clay mask, also called a mud pack, is used to smooth the skin on your face. OK, let's recap the vocabulary we've learnt in this programme, starting with the verb to drain, which means to remove liquid.
To cling means to stick or hold tightly onto something.
If you kickstart something, you make it start or develop more quickly.
To manipulate means to skillfully use or control something.
The phrase down the line means sometime in the future.
And finally, the idiom only time will tell means that the truth about something happening now will only be known in the future. Once again, our 6 minutes are up, but remember to join us again next time for more trending topics and useful vocabulary here at 6 Minute English. Goodbye for now.
Bye.
6 Minute English.
From BBC Learning English.